I'm going to be talking about Gen Z, born between 1997 and 2012. This group is really burned out, has a very high prevalence of mental health conditions, doesn't really engage in conventional work, and of course I'm talking generally, stereotypes. I'm not talking about you as a Gen Z, you may or may not relate to this, but when you run a business and it's based on providing services to different types of people, generation and age is one part of that. And for marketing, generational studies are mostly used in marketing to try and work out what you're going to buy. And what that means is they try to understand how you think, how you see the world, who are your influences in making purchasing decisions, what kind of channels do you use to get information, etc. So in the context of burnout, so I talk a lot about burnout being a combination of being exhausted, having a negative or cynical outlook, and not being able to make progress in an area that's important to you. That last one, in an area that's important to you, is typically called productivity in the burnout literature. So it's got that workplace lens on people being happy and productive. If you're not working, or if you're a full-time carer, or you're a mother of a family and you're just wanting to focus on your family, you can still experience burnout. If you feel like what you're trying to do is not working and you can't get any breakthrough or shift in it, so you're in a rut, and add tiredness, add sort of a reinforced patterns of negative thinking to that, add a few months of not being able to find solutions or good help, that's burnout. So for Gen Z, the burnout seems to be linked to some different things. It's linked to their exposure to all the problems going on in the world. There's crises every day all over the world that get just fed through the platforms. And compared to when I was growing up as a Gen X, that stuff was a lot more remote. There were some big events that did different wars. I remember the Iraq War, things like that you remembered, or I remembered, but they were a little bit remote to my day-to-day life. I didn't look at them every day. They weren't part of a cumulative sense of the world falling apart, that income inequality was just going absolutely horrible with the concentration of wealth, people with jobs and families becoming homeless even though they have jobs, the degree of sort of mental health and drug-related issues, particularly like in the US, there's the fentanyl epidemic. Then there's COVID and the complete dislocation of being able to get face-to-face and opportunities to learn and practice social interactions. I stumbled there because I want to use the word social attunement, which is a really good word, I think, a good two words, because it's when you learn passively and you observe people in real time and you get cues on body language, which most of our communication we know is through face-to-face and non-verbal cues. So when you see things in social media formats, they're curated and they're designed for an algorithm. And there's plenty of people talking about this. I don't need to go much more into that bit. But so I was talking about the reasons Gen Z seem to be burned out. When I'm talking about those world issues, I think there's a disconnect then about if you're looking at work or career or opportunities to earn money, and they actually don't earn enough to live where you want to live or where you grew up. And there's no story that's a vision for perhaps buying a home, having children, all those parameters that your parents grew up with and aspired to in many cases aren't there. So there's this sort of vacuum now around what the future looks like. And two, that the way that the work is actually set up seems to be inherently meaningless and disconnected relative to things that are important to you. So that values alignment is one of the crucial things in burnout, in choosing work, that if you're aligned with the actual work you're doing at a very heart level, at a values level, not necessarily perfectly, but there are elements where you really feel connected to your work, it's actually a protection in becoming burnt out. It's something that buoys you up, that gives you a bit of a buffer when shit hits the fan and when times get hard. So having a sense of purpose is actually a very key preventative factor for me when I work with people in burnout, really making sure they're clear on their purpose. And then that doesn't mean having ambition. That doesn't mean having a lot of money or having really fancy titles either. It can just be really simple stuff around what's important to you. So I've said, what have I said so far? I've said the reasons that burnout is this exposure to global media, growing up without social attunement. And what that means is it's harder to connect to people. They're more prone to loneliness and feeling like it's harder to get friendships if you don't have communal hangouts that are face-to-face stuff. The way you're developing friendships is mediated through these social media platforms, which commercially reward looks and certain types of very, transactional, quick information chunks, sound bites. And I think the final thing I would say around why they're burned out would be the education or the idea of what work is for the future of work, or what will be relevant in coming years. So obviously with AI, this is a current topic that takes up a lot of space for people trying to work out the future of work and what jobs will be around and what are the opportunities, what are the threats around it. When you're looking at conventional industries, though, I might be talking about customer service. I work mostly with healthcare, people in healthcare, education, nursing, those industries that have super high burnout. Part of that is because they're not adapting to the nature of how those jobs are set up and those roles are set up, and those industries does not match the actual nature of what they need to do anymore. So an example might be in customer service, because the products, digital platforms are often developed in a head office, like centrally, and they have their own timetables and their own investment schedules and return on investment and business plans. And then they've got the customer service people that just have to pick up the slack. So when things go wrong, and they've got to navigate what the bots are and the interaction between, if someone has a complaint, why the hell does the product do this? So things like that, where I spent a lot of time with those teams, it was this kind of sense of the jobs at a low level, quite a junior level, are horrible. They're really horrible. I would definitely not be doing any customer service. I did do customer service when I was younger, but I think now it would be very different, because the expectation is you're dealing with customers that are dealing with tech and dealing with systems that are very depersonalized. And in many cases, you may as well be a robot, but you want to add a human touch by nature to be valuable, but they're not set up like that. So there's a fundamental, I don't know what the name is for that. I'm thinking of how do I call that as a cause or a contributing factor for Gen Z. I think it's just outdated industry redesign. No, that's not it. Anyway, what's also interesting about Gen Z in their current age bracket is they're coming in that 25-year-old period. When you turn 25, well, the research says that your prefrontal cortex, your brain, is fully developed. So before then, your executive function, your impulse control, your weighing up decisions, your concept of risk and reward is not very well formed, which is why drivers have to pay a premium if they've got young drivers, because they just don't have the same level of, control or understanding of taking different perspectives. So prefrontal cortex is very much being able to put yourselves in someone else's shoes, or you think through a situation from multiple perspectives, including what is social interest stuff. So that's quite interesting in the sense of, by that age, young adulthood, this idea of having a specialty or knowing a lot of something about something is really important, even if it's not things that you're going to you're going to do forever. Maybe you're only going to be in an industry for a few years, but it's the idea of having concrete knowledge that's very grounded in reality that then translates to outcomes. When you have more fluid intelligence, which is in your younger years, you have fluid intelligence because you're taking in a lot more data. Your brain is set up to basically absorb a lot more. And then, when you come more of age, it's more about how you use that information that you've been collecting on the way. So I think there's also a piece there about what kind of expertise or experience can be talked about when you're that age, and I found it incredibly hard because I did a degree, but I did topics I really wanted to do, but there weren't any jobs around that. So I knew a whole lot of stuff that was really obscure and that was very not mainstream. So I did electives even within traditional economics. There were electives in Marxism, and industrial sociology was actually one of my favorite topics, but there was nothing to do with that apart from becoming a researcher and academic. Now, 20 years later, I'm actually revisiting some of the studies that I learned back then, and bringing it in because I can do that now. I've got concrete knowledge. I've got specialties where even though I don't love them, but I know that it makes me an expert in certain fields, and then I can springboard from them. I can jump from them, make lateral moves into other types of work. It's still a bit of a process. It's not a perfect art by any means. It's trial and error, but it is definitely an asset. It is something that's been really valuable. One of the other things about Gen Z is they have an intuitive understanding about neurodiversity and sort of sensitivity to people's identity. It's quite striking when I have multiple hats and I am neurodiverse. I can see the change in society in being able to talk about that. It's still not really where I wish it was, but there's at least that level of awareness that people can talk about. But even in my situation, when I negotiate contracts for work, I have baked into my contracts a bunch of stuff that's about being neurodiverse. So it accommodates the adjustments that I wish organisations could make, but they can't. They just can't. There is a few that are doing it that are really on that leading edge, but there's a long way to go for most of organisations that fly those flags, that have those breakfast morning teas and talk about how inclusive they are. It's a friggin' long way to go. What I think that's really why that's interesting to me is, well, because of my own bias and my own experience, but by nature of being neurodiverse, you are aware that your perspective is different to others. And you're aware that when you talk to people who are neurodiverse, you can talk in a language that other people don't understand because they'll follow. I have a friend, we follow each other. We understand when we go off on tangents, and there's no need to translate and explain why I jumped from topic A to topic Z and then back to topic P. It's automatic. And one of the features of modern workplaces is that if you do that, you're, I don't know, maybe flighty or less credible. And what's really interesting, though, is those perspectives is part of what you might call creative intelligence and being able to pull things apart and put things back together in non-conventional ways. So people have been doing this for decades. It's nothing new in terms of Edward de Bono's thinking hats and different authors over in history that have pointed to different types of intelligence and different ways of solving problems. These are the types of intelligences that are correlated with neurodiversity that seem to be better at solving the problems of today, the issues of today, because, for example, a bugbear in my previous work history was that because the way corporations and governments are set up, they can't identify shared purposes. So when I was working with Aboriginal communities and I'd be negotiating with the EPA or National Parks and Wildlife, they'd have their own definitions in law, and they couldn't actually both recognise they were looking after the same thing. They were trying to get the common objective because they had to go through their legal and independent processes to safeguard and to protect their agencies. And that's an example that probably applies in a lot of different contexts. So that makes absolutely no sense. And while people that aren't neurodiverse can see that, they don't seem to get as affected by it or as upset and distressed by it. I'm not talking scientifically here. I don't know this for sure, but I've had enough conversations with people to see, what is it? It's like if something can be different, it's a lot harder to detach. If you think, oh, well, that's just how it is. That's government, that's big business, that's just work. Put it over there in a little compartment box and put it aside and detach. That's fine if you can do that. If you can't do that, which I think Gen Z can't do that. I actually think they can't do it. I'm very general here, of course, but I think it seems to be and also maybe when you're younger, you have a natural idealism and it makes absolutely no sense. And it should make no sense because it doesn't make sense. But your problem in that age group is getting enough credibility to be somebody with a voice. And the numbers of people that are able to get a voice, we have some sort of flagship people. Is it Zoe Tame? I'm thinking the woman that spoke up around the sexual abuse allegations. People that speak up. You could put the climate change Greta in that camp. But even then, they're critics. Well, in case of Greta, it's quite easy to put her success down to some sort of social contagion effect of people just loving the idea of the environment being important, not necessarily backing it up with how they live. So there can be people that are very liberal in their views and progressive, but conservatively, they still have very conservative ways of living. These are the things that bother me on a Sunday morning. Imagine that. So my summary, Gen Z, sorry, one more thing. Networks is another thing that's come up as important in the literature when you look at the types of things to encourage for young people. And yet, what does that mean, right? So one of the cases against remote work is it's harder to network. If you're networking digitally, it's not quite the same as having face-to-face. I think there's a level of trust that you get when you work with people and know them face-to-face, even if it's not the full-time thing. But if you have in a room, because you get more data, right? So if I'm in a room with somebody, there's a whole lot of, I think of it like a funnel. I'm getting a whole lot of cues about that person unconsciously, sort of neuroception. I'm getting a feeling sense of them. I'm getting a sense of whether I would trust them. It's actually harder to work that out. When you don't have that contact. It's not impossible. You have to go and do due diligence in other ways. You have to really get to know people probably a bit more strategically and understand, particularly in the context of risks of scams, and you need to validate people's identity, who they are, who they say they are, that their work history. You really have to go through more steps, I think, to be able to work effectively and network online, unless you have shared connections. And from the perspective of probably the older generations, because we have enough face-to-face repertoire, that's not the word. The numbers of people I've worked with face-to-face is in the hundreds, and a lot of them are on things like LinkedIn. And I can now draw on those connections. I think they're called dormant networks or passive networks. They are really important going forward when you look at career opportunities and getting work, because presuming you haven't burnt the bridge and salved the connection, which in some cases I did do that, there's a sense of knowing people that are in a different level. So what does that mean for Gen Z? I think it means cultivating a local community regardless of whether it's work and non-work. It's just cultivating local community, face-to-face events. That means going against the tide of social activities that might be all online. It's harder to find things face-to-face. If you go face-to-face, maybe you've got more social anxiety because you didn't grow up like that. You didn't grow up with that being natural. And even if you did grow up like that, you can get anxious. So there's a process of, working out what environments work for you, what kinds of people you like, what kinds of environments do you feel like. Environments, I don't know, it could be anything from like a chess club to cosplay or sports. Finding something that's tactile, local, where you can go and hang out with people, typically do something else. So you're not going there just to socialize. You're doing there because you like doing, I don't know, playing. It could be gaming, but gaming is still too digital, I think. It's got to be something in a little bit more in nature, or at least a bit more slower. Yes, I think that's one of the key takeaways. I think the other thing is not to have an idea of just to give up this whole what you're going to do when you grow up. I think earning money and having enough to live on is a primary concern, and there's lots of different ways now. There's more ways than there used to be to earn money. There's ways to experiment with different types of work without committing. There's looking at sectors where there's growth a lot more. I've been looking at the carer stuff. There's all these new platforms set up for people just to do home help, and can be disability related or aged care related, or just being local in the community and being able to go out and get what you can, get experience wherever you can. I think it's really good. In terms of burnout, what I want to do going forward, I think it's a situation I wouldn't presume to know. I would want to do some sort of focus groups, surveys, the kinds of things where you go, what do you actually want, guys? Like listening. There's a lot of listening that has to be done here. There's a lot of what would motivate you if people say you're not motivated. If there's skill gaps that are related to smartphones, and I'm thinking of things like Excel and Word, which are the staples of any office job, and they're still staples. They've been diehard, hung on in their Office 365 and all its different versions. That stuff is still important, even with AI, that being able to present information in a way where VIP grand poobahs can easily understand it and use it in making decisions is massively important. And it gives you exposure to the types of decisions that those people are making in jobs that are currently not accessible, but it's really good education exposure. When I worked for senior boards and went touring with VIPs, it was one of the best experiences. Even though at the time, I remember just being I was way too cool for it, really. Way too cool. But there was also kudos when you're hanging out with VIPs. Got to say that. So if there's Gen Zs watching, please get in touch. If you have some ideas of what you think would work, if you want to chat, if you want to help me design a survey, that's always fun. Love designing a survey. Put some infographics on it and make it all flashy and neon lights, because I know you guys like that. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting, and that's it from the floor for now. All right.